On the farthest edge of the coastline where land crumbled into the churning sea, there stood a lighthouse, tall, weathered and unwavering, its white stone body streaked with salt and time, its lantern room eternally watching the horizon like an old sentinel of the waves. The wind there never truly slept. It murmured at dawn, hummed at noon, and howled like a lost thing after sunset, weaving tales with sea spray and gull cries. This lighthouse was home to Elias, an elderly keeper who had lived among storms and silence for more years than he bothered to count, and Luna, a sleek, amber-eyed cat whose coat shimmered like wet obsidian in the morning light. Together, they formed an unspoken bond, not born of grand stories but of a daily rhythm steeped in quiet companionship, her soft-footed pacing on the hardwood floor his constant echo, her purring a balm in the lonely nights that stretched on like the endless sea. Elias, once a sailor, had chosen this life of landlocked isolation after too many years spent at sea, haunted not by ghosts but by memories that came in tides, memories of voices lost in storms, of sails torn from masts like paper, of nights when the ocean seemed ready to devour every man aboard without apology. He had found refuge in the lighthouse, not because it was safe, but because it made sense. Something to light, something to tend, something that depended on him to stand tall and steadfast. And Luna, who had arrived one rain-lashed evening as a soaked and shivering kitten tucked into the folds of a fisherman's coat, had simply never left. She was curious, contemplative, and fiercely loyal in that peculiar way only cats can be, never demanding affection, only granting it when the moment felt right. Every morning, Elias would brew a strong cup of black tea, its steam curling in the drafty kitchen like phantom hands, and Luna would hop onto the counter, her nose twitching as she watched him with eyes too clever for comfort. Together, they would inspect the lighthouse's gears and mirrors, Elias winding the great brass mechanism with practiced care while Luna slinked between his feet, her tail brushing his boots. By dusk, as the sun bled into the sea in molten streaks of crimson and gold, Elias would light the beacon, and the great lens would turn with a low, rhythmic groan, casting its beam in a wide arc across the water, a lifeline to sailors unknown. Sometimes, ships passed by and saluted with foghorns that rolled like thunder over the waves, and Elias would raise a hand in solemn acknowledgement, knowing how much that light meant to those out there in the dark. But most nights were quieter, just him, the sea, the stars, and Luna, whose world was the cliffs and shadows and salt-slick rocks below. She wandered freely as cats do, scaling ledges, watching crabs skitter, and staring into the abyss with a kind of reverence. The townsfolk, few and far between, spoke of Elias as a relic of another time, a solitary keeper who had chosen a life that no longer needed choosing now that satellites and automation had turned lighthouses into historical curiosities. But Elias believed in duty, in presence, in the gravity of showing up even when no one saw. And he believed in Luna. More than just a pet, she was his tether to something alive, something wild and untamed that even the sea couldn't swallow. One night, long after the sun had disappeared and the wind carried a scent of far-off rain, Elias stood at the top of the lighthouse, hand resting on the iron railing, eyes squinting into the foggy expanse beyond the beam's arc. Something was off. There, faint and pulsing like a heartbeat, was a light on the horizon, not the clean flash of a navigation buoy or the slow sweep of another beacon, but a strange, flickering gleam, low and uncertain. It blinked with no pattern, a quiet stammer against the black. Elias felt a familiar tightening in his chest, not fear exactly, but unease, the same he'd felt years ago the night before the mariner's ghost disappeared without a trace. He turned to call Luna, instinct tugging at him to alert her, though she likely wouldn't understand, but she was already gone. The kitchen door creaked on its hinges as the wind pushed it open wider. Elias descended quickly, calling her name in a voice not used to shouting. "Luna? Girl?" But the only reply was the rising wind and the pounding surf below. Outside, her small paw prints were already being devoured by rain, leading toward the jagged trail that wound down the cliffs. Panic didn't come swiftly. It arrived like a slow wave of cold water seeping through the seams of an old boat. She had never left the property at night. Something in that light had pulled her toward it, Elias realized, and he could not explain how he knew, only that he did. He donned his coat and grabbed the old oil lantern that he hadn't used in years, lighting it with shaking fingers. As he stepped into the storm, following her path, he whispered to himself not prayers but stories, snippets of the past when he was young and fast and the ocean hadn't yet turned on him, when he believed in omens and fate, and when cats didn't disappear into the dark chasing ghostly lights. The sea roared louder now, a beast awakened, and the rain came in sideways sheets, drenching him to the bone. Still he walked, his boots slipping on slick stone, his eyes scanning the shoreline for movement. He would find her, no matter what waited out there. He owed her that much. She had never left him, not through the winters when ice sealed the cove, not through the days when grief threatened to swallow him whole. And now, she was out there alone, a black smudge against the silver fury of the storm. Somewhere deep within the wind, he thought he heard her cry, high and sharp like the whistle of a shipwrecked soul. The night swallowed sound as much as it did light, cloaking everything in a kind of breathing, living darkness that pressed close to Elias's skin as he picked his way down the narrow path carved into the cliffside, the old oil lantern in his hands sputtering against the salty gusts that lashed across his face, soaking his beard and chilling him deeper than bone. The trail, familiar in the daylight, had turned treacherous beneath the storm's wet fury. Rocks shifted underfoot, and slick moss betrayed each step, but Elias moved with the quiet determination of someone with no other choice. He was not old now, not to himself, not with Luna somewhere out there, small and alone in the teeth of the wind. The light he had seen, faint and irregular, still blinked on the horizon like a distant heartbeat, but now that he was closer to the water, he could feel it was not a trick of tired eyes. It had a strange rhythm, as though it were signaling, not by machine, but by hand, hesitant, almost pleading. Elias remembered old stories, passed in quiet sailors' bars and whispered through the hulls of ships at midnight, of ghost lights and cursed shores, of men lured by illusions only to vanish into the tide, and though he'd laughed at them once, back when he had sunburned arms and a captain's confidence, he wasn't laughing now. No, now he was worried, not just for Luna, but for whatever it was that had called her. Down by the cove where the tide pooled and retreated with the patience of old gods, Elias paused beneath a bent pine, its roots knotted into the rocks like a warning hand. "Luna," he called again, the lantern lifted high, casting a golden orb of light that danced on the wet stones, catching only shadows and salt spray in return. His voice sounded strange in the storm, small and hollow, and for a moment, Elias felt the deep press of time and solitude, the weight of all the days he'd spent alone with only Luna for warmth and witness. That was when he saw it. A paw print, small and sharp-edged, freshly imprinted in the mud between two stones. "You clever girl," he whispered, heart hammering. "You were here." The prince led him around the bend of the cove to a hidden hollow in the cliff face, a place he hadn't visited in years, not since the day he found a seal pup stranded there, its cries swallowed by the waves, and he'd carried it on his back to the tidipools until its mother came. Now the hollow was deeper, its mouth worn wide by time and weather, and inside, the air shifted, not warmer, but charged, as if the cave itself held its breath. Elias ducked low, the lantern guiding his steps, and the sound of the storm muffled behind him like a fading memory. Inside the cave, the scent of brine was thick and old, mingled with something faintly metallic, copper, maybe, or rust, and then he heard it, not Luna's meow, but a low murmur, like someone muttering in their sleep. The beam of the lantern caught on something reflective, a shard of glass, no, a mirror, and then he saw it. Not a ghost, not a trick, but a man, hunched and soaked, wrapped in the tattered remains of what might have once been a captain's coat, his face gaunt, eyes wild, and beside him, nestled against a coil of rope, was Luna, calm and still, her eyes watching Elias with a strange, knowing patience. "She found me," the man said, voice raw as wet sandpaper. "Your cat. She came to me in the dark." Elias didn't move at first. His heart stuttered, not from fear, but from the dissonance of it all. The storm, the light, the cave, and Luna, dry and proud as if she had simply gone out for an evening stroll and returned with a stranger. "Who are you?" Elias asked, his voice low, more wary than afraid. The man looked past him, as if expecting something to come from the shadows. My name is Thomas. My ship, the Serene, we were caught offshore in the storm 3 nights ago. We lost power. No radio. Drifted too close to the reef. I think," he stopped, voice catching. "I think I'm the only one who made it." Elias knelt slowly, reaching to stroke Luna's back. She leaned into his hand, purring softly, as though to say everything was all right now. "And the light?" Elias asked. "That was you." Thomas nodded. "I found a lantern among the wreckage. Used the last of the oil. I've been lighting it at night, hoping someone on shore might see. She, your cat, found me the day after I washed up. She kept coming back, leading me to dry spots, curling up beside me when the cold got bad." He looked down at his hands, thin and trembling. "I thought she was a spirit at first. Something the sea sent to keep me from going mad." Elias stared at the man, something tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with age or the weather. "She's always known when someone needed her," he said. "Saved me too, though I didn't realize it at the time." The cave seemed to breathe with them, sheltering their shared silence. Elias helped the man stand, draping his coat over Thomas's shoulders, his mind already moving to what came next, getting him warm, calling the Coast Guard, letting the village know there'd been a wreck. But more than that, he was thinking about Luna, about how she had felt the wrongness in the night and answered it without hesitation. Back up the cliff path, the wind had softened slightly, though the storm was far from over. Thomas leaned on Elias for support, his steps unsure, but Luna led the way with confidence, tail high, her paws choosing the firmest rocks, the driest ledges. When they reached the lighthouse, Elias guided the sailor inside, lit the fire, and brewed hot tea, adding a splash of honey he'd been saving for a special day. Luna curled on the windowsill, watching the horizon where the flickering light no longer blinked. Later that night, after Thomas was asleep in the spare room and the storm had begun to die down to a grumble, Elias stood by the beacon's great lens, one hand resting on the gears as they turned. He looked down at Luna, who had come to sit beside him. "You knew," he said softly. "Before I did." She blinked slowly, her gaze unwavering. Somewhere beyond the waves, the wreck of the Serene lay in pieces, claimed by the ocean that gave and took in equal measure. But one life had been spared, not by the keeper, not by the light, but by the cat who kept her own silent watch. Elias turned back to the lens and lit the flame again, the great eye of the lighthouse sweeping once more across the sea, but now he understood, it wasn't just machines and men that kept sailors safe. Sometimes, it was something quieter, something smaller, something with paws and fur and a heart that understood storms in ways no man ever could. The days that followed the storm were strange, marked by a calm that felt too deep, like the ocean had momentarily paused to catch its breath. The wind had calmed, and the waves, once violent and unforgiving, lapped gently against the rocks, as if the sea itself had acknowledged the quiet heroism of a cat who had kept watch over a stranded man. Thomas, though clearly weakened by the ordeal, recovered quickly under the care of Elias and the warmth of the lighthouse, his gratitude toward Luna undying. Elias, too, found himself looking at the cat with new eyes, as though the storm had revealed something hidden beneath her calm exterior, a depth of awareness, a quiet intelligence that seemed too profound for any ordinary animal. And Luna, for her part, seemed content to let her actions speak for her. She would curl up in the nook of Elias's armchair, purring softly when he sat beside her to read, or slip out for her evening walks along the cliff, her eyes glowing in the dusk as she ventured down to the tidipools, always returning before the light began to fade. She had a way of knowing when Elias needed her near, and when she sensed his restlessness, she would appear at his side, her warm presence grounding him in the solitude that he so often sought. The lighthouse had always been a place of quietude, but with Thomas staying in the spare room, it felt different, more alive, perhaps, in the way a house is when it is filled with the sound of another person's voice. The mornings were spent in companionship, as Elias showed Thomas the upkeep of the lighthouse, from winding the massive gears that controlled the light to checking the oil in the great lamp. Luna, of course, was there too, her small form darting around their feet, sometimes hopping onto the parapet and peering out over the sea, as though keeping watch, just in case. By afternoon, Elias would brew tea for them both, the scent of herbs and honey filling the air, while the sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows on the stone floors. Thomas had a quiet way about him, his words measured, his gaze far off, as though his mind still lingered in the storm, unable to fully leave the wreckage behind. Yet, in Luna's presence, something shifted in him, a peace that could only be found in the simplest of things, a purring cat at his feet or the steady beam of light cutting through the darkness. For Elias, these days were a welcome break from the long stretches of isolation, a reminder that even in the vast expanse of the ocean, the lighthouse was not entirely alone. It had a purpose, just as Luna had a purpose, guiding, watching, waiting. One evening, as they sat together by the fire after dinner, Elias noticed Thomas growing quiet. The sailor's eyes had settled on Luna, who was curled comfortably in her favorite spot beside the hearth. "You know," Thomas said, his voice soft, almost reverent, "I don't think I've ever met a cat quite like her." Elias chuckled, stirring his tea. "She's special, that one. Always has been." Thomas looked down, as if sorting through his words carefully. "I thought, when I first saw her after I washed up, I thought she was some kind of omen. The way she came to me, how she didn't seem afraid." He paused, and there was something in his gaze, something far away and heavy. "I think she saved me. Not just from the storm, but from something deeper. Something that was pulling at me." Elias raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Thomas hesitated. "I've been to the edge, you see. I've seen the ocean swallow people whole. I've lost men to the depths, and I thought, maybe it was time for me to. Maybe that was how it was supposed to end." His voice cracked, just for a moment. "But then she found me. She showed up when I thought I had nothing left. And I don't know how to explain it, but she gave me something back. Maybe, or a reason to try again." Elias was silent for a long while, watching the flames flicker in the hearth. The wind howled outside, but inside the lighthouse, there was only warmth and quiet understanding. "I think you're right," Elias finally said, his voice low. "She's always known when someone needed her. When the sea gets too loud, or when the night feels too long, she's there. Maybe that's her gift." Thomas nodded, his eyes soft with gratitude. The fire crackled between them, the room heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Outside, the stars began to peek through the clearing sky, their pale light reflecting on the surface of the water, which now appeared still, as if the storm had never come at all. Luna, who had been silently observing the conversation from her perch by the hearth, stretched and yawned, her tail flicking lazily, before she stood and padded over to Thomas's side. She sat beside him, her body curling into his leg, as if to offer the final, unspoken gesture of her companionship. Thomas smiled, reaching down to scratch behind her ears, and for a moment, the world outside faded away. It was just the three of them, Elias, Thomas, and Luna, together in the warmth of the lighthouse, the storm a distant memory. But that evening, something else stirred within Elias, a feeling he hadn't had in years, a sense of peace that was not fleeting, like the calm after a storm, but steady, like the beam of the lighthouse itself. He realized, as he watched Luna purring contentedly at Thomas's feet, that the true purpose of the lighthouse wasn't just to guide ships safely to shore, or to protect the town from the dangers of the sea. It was a place where people, like Thomas, could find their way back to themselves, even in the darkest times. And Luna, his constant companion, his silent guide, was the lighthouse's truest keeper, the one who saw the unseen and heard the unspoken. She had saved him once, long ago, and she had saved Thomas now. There was a kind of quiet grace in that, something beyond words, something pure. Elias stood, stretching his stiff legs, and walked over to the window, his hand resting on the cool glass as he looked out at the night sky. The stars were bright, the sea calm, and in that moment, he knew with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic or reason, that no matter what storms came, Luna would always be there to guide them home. As the days stretched into weeks, the rhythm of life in the lighthouse settled once again into a comfortable routine, one that had become second nature to Elias. The unpredictable pulse of the storm had faded, leaving behind a clarity in the air, a sense of stillness that made the place feel almost too quiet, too perfect. Thomas, though slowly healing, still seemed like a man caught between two worlds, one foot in the present, one in the memory of his lost crew, his ship torn apart in the same storm that had nearly claimed him. He had moments of distant contemplation, staring out over the water with a look in his eyes that Elias understood only too well. He too had known the feeling of a past too heavy to carry. But with Luna's quiet presence, the unspoken balm of her purring and knowing gaze, Thomas seemed to gain strength each day. He worked alongside Elias to maintain the lighthouse, his hands now steady, his steps no longer faltering as they had when he first arrived. Luna, as always, was an active participant in the small rituals of their days, whether it was her soft, silent tracking of fish in the tidal pools or her brief forays into the lighthouse's high tower, where she would sit in the window and watch the world pass by in the distance. It was as though she had claimed the lighthouse as her own kingdom, and they were simply her guests, allowed to share in its solitude. On the rare days when Elias had to go into the village for supplies, Thomas would take over the duties of keeping the light burning, and Luna would follow him everywhere, as if her watchful gaze ensured everything was in its proper place. The old keeper marveled at how quickly the man had adjusted to the rhythm of the lighthouse. It wasn't an easy place to live, not for anyone. The isolation, the relentless winds, and the constant reminder of the sea's unpredictable nature could break even the strongest. But here, Thomas was finding his way, in no small part thanks to Luna, whose presence had become a quiet force of nature in itself. Yet, despite the tranquility that settled like a heavy fog over the lighthouse, Elias felt a subtle tension building in his chest, a quiet ache that had no clear source. He often found himself standing by the beacon's lens, watching the beams slice through the night sky, as if waiting for something that had not yet arrived. It was on one such evening, when the last glimmers of twilight had given way to the cold embrace of night, that he first noticed the odd pattern in the waves, a subtle shift, a rhythm, like a pulse in the water. It was barely noticeable at first, just a gentle sway, a rhythm that didn't match the usual ebb and flow of the tides. But as the days wore on, the pattern grew more defined. The waves began to come in with a deliberate force, not the chaotic surge of a storm, but the kind of movement that suggested something deeper, something underneath, stirring in the dark depths beyond. Luna, too, seemed to sense it, though she remained as composed as always, her amber eyes scanning the horizon with a kind of quiet calculation. Elias knew better than to dismiss such things. He had lived long enough to understand that the sea was not just a body of water, but a living thing, full of currents and forces unseen. He had spent years on the water, and in his youth, he had believed he understood it all. But now, on the cliffs of the lighthouse, he found himself wondering what lay beyond what could be seen, what the waves carried beneath their surface, what the currents whispered to each other when no one was listening. Late one night, after the wind had died down to a whisper and the stars shone like diamonds above, Elias stood at the base of the lighthouse, staring out over the ocean, trying to make sense of the growing unease in his gut. Luna sat beside him, as always, her body low to the ground, ears flicking at the slightest sound. It was in this quiet, this stillness, that Elias heard it, the softest of calls, a distant, almost imperceptible sound, carried on the wind. It was faint, but unmistakable. A voice, or something that sounded like a voice, drifting in from the sea. His heart quickened, and his mind flashed to the wreck of the sea wren, to the lost sailors, to the whispers he had heard in his youth about the creatures of the deep, the ones that spoke in riddles, who called sailors to the water with voices too alluring to resist. He turned to Luna, who had risen to her feet, her body tense and poised, eyes fixed on the water. Elias's breath caught in his chest. Something was out there. Something had stirred in the depths. "Luna," he whispered, though he didn't know why he said it, whether to comfort himself or to call her to attention. But Luna, wise and silent, didn't need any command. She padded to the edge of the cliff, her tail swishing slowly behind her, her gaze unflinching as she studied the water below. And then, as if on cue, the light shifted, a sudden, sharp flicker, like a ghostly glow on the horizon, more vivid than the ordinary reflection of the stars. Elias's pulse quickened. It was not the normal glint of the moon on the water, nor was it the flashing of another ship's lantern. It was different, erratic, almost desperate. Without thinking, he grabbed the lantern from the table and made his way back down the cliff, his heart pounding in his ears, the cold wind biting at his face. Luna, ever the silent guide, walked beside him, her steps unhurried but purposeful. They reached the edge of the cove once again, and there, in the moonlight, Elias saw the cause of the strange light, a small, abandoned boat, rocking gently in the tide. Its sail was torn, and the hull was battered by the relentless waves, but it was still afloat. And at its bow, a figure, drenched and pale, hair tangled like seaweed, sat, staring at the shore. Elias felt his breath catch in his throat. The figure didn't move, didn't seem to notice his presence at all. But Luna, who had always been attuned to such things, began to move forward, her steps more purposeful than ever. Elias's hand tightened around the lantern, his heart racing as he followed her lead. There was something wrong about this, the way the figure remained unmoving, as if it were waiting for something or someone. And the closer they drew, the more Elias could feel it. A coldness in the air, an energy that hummed just beneath the surface, like the sea itself was holding its breath. Luna, unbothered by the oddity, padded to the edge of the boat, her tail swishing slowly as she sniffed the air. Elias came to a stop just behind her, eyes narrowing. "What in the world?" he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, as if afraid that speaking too loudly would break the fragile tension in the air. The figure in the boat, still silent and unmoving, turned its head slowly, its eyes wide and dark, like the depths of the ocean itself. For a brief, terrifying moment, Elias wondered if he had made a terrible mistake coming down to the shore. The air grew colder still, and the wind seemed to hold its breath. Luna didn't flinch. And then, without a word, the figure began to disappear into the water, as if it were becoming one with the sea itself, swallowed up by the dark tides. The figure in the boat was gone before Elias could react, slipping into the water as though it had never been there at all, leaving behind nothing but ripples in the darkened sea. For a long moment, Elias stood frozen, staring at the spot where the mysterious apparition had vanished, his mind reeling with questions that had no answers. The cold wind, now sharper than before, bit at his skin, and yet he couldn't shake the chill that had settled deep within him, an unease that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. Luna, ever composed, didn't hesitate. She turned, walking slowly back toward the lighthouse, her tail swishing low and deliberate, as though she had seen this all before, as though it was just another moment in a pattern she had long ago come to understand. Elias followed her, his lantern held high, the beam of light slicing through the night, but it felt hollow now, distant, as if even the light was uncertain. He reached the top of the cliff again, the lighthouse looming above them, its bright beams sweeping across the endless sea, and for the first time in years, Elias felt a deep, inexplicable sense of dread. He couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize the chill in his bones, but the world around him seemed to have shifted, as if something had been disturbed beneath the surface of the ocean, something that was now moving in the shadows. As he entered the lighthouse and closed the door behind him, he could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him. The warmth of the fire in the hearth, the quiet hum of the lighthouse's machinery, and the familiar presence of Luna beside him should have brought comfort, but instead, they made him feel more isolated, more uncertain than ever. Luna, ever watchful, had already made her way to the windowsill, her amber eyes scanning the horizon, and Elias joined her, leaning his forearms against the cool stone of the window. The sea stretched out before him, endless and dark, its surface reflecting the pale light of the moon. But beyond the beauty, beyond the serenity, Elias could feel the presence of something vast, something lurking beneath the waves. It was as though the ocean had become alive, its depths teeming with secrets that had remained hidden for centuries. He turned his gaze to Luna, who was still watching the water with a quiet intensity. "What did we see down there, Luna?" he asked softly, though he knew the cat would never answer in words. She looked up at him, her golden eyes unwavering, and for a moment, Elias felt as if she were communicating something too ancient, too deep for his understanding. Luna had always been more than just a cat. She had a way of knowing things, of sensing things, that no human could comprehend. Elias had come to accept that over the years, But now, with the strange apparition in the boat and the inexplicable sense of foreboding that hung in the air, he wondered if there was more to Luna's quiet wisdom than he had ever realized. Later that night, after the lanterns had been extinguished and the fire had burned low, Elias lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts swirling in the dark. The figure in the boat, what had it been? A ghost? A figment of his imagination, brought on by the isolation of the lighthouse? Or something else? Something that had been waiting in the deep, stirring now as if it had awakened after a long slumber? His mind refused to settle, the questions gnawing at him until the early hours of the morning. At some point, he must have drifted off to sleep, because when he awoke, the light of dawn was already creeping in through the narrow windows, and the storm that had been gathering in the night had passed, leaving behind a calm, clear sky. The air felt different now, lighter, as though the very atmosphere had shifted in the wake of the unsettling events. Elias got up and went to the window, pulling back the curtains to reveal the ocean, its surface now smooth and tranquil, as if nothing had happened. But Luna was there, sitting beside him, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. Something in her posture told him that she wasn't done watching, that there was still something more to see. She had been there before, he realized, when the tides had shifted and the currents had changed. She had always known the rhythms of the sea, the secrets it kept hidden. He had trusted her once before, trusted her to guide him through the storms, and now, as the lighthouse keeper, he had to trust her again. Whatever was coming, whatever had been disturbed beneath the surface, Luna would know long before he did. It was just after sunrise when the first strange occurrence happened. Elias was checking the gears of the lighthouse when he heard it, a soft knock at the door. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but then it came again, more distinct this time. He froze, his heart skipping a beat. It wasn't possible. There were no boats scheduled to arrive, and no one from the village had made the trek up to the lighthouse in days. The only person besides him and Thomas was Luna, and she didn't knock. Slowly, Elias made his way to the door, his feet heavy with the weight of uncertainty. He paused before opening it, listening for any sound from the other side. But there was nothing. The world outside the lighthouse was quiet, the sky bright with the first light of day. With a deep breath, he pulled the door open, and standing there, staring up at him with wide, unblinking eyes, was a man, pale, disheveled, and drenched in seawater. He had the same gaunt look as Thomas had when he first arrived, but his clothes were different, older, ragged. His eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to look through Elias, not at him. For a moment, Elias couldn't move, could only stare at the stranger in disbelief. The man opened his mouth, but no words came out, just a faint, hollow sound, like the call of a seabird. Elias took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for the lantern on the table. Behind him, Luna hissed, her fur standing on end, and Elias turned to see her stance change, her body low and alert, her eyes locked onto the man at the door. The man swayed slightly as though caught in some unseen current, his hands reaching out, but it was not toward Elias. It was toward Luna. And in that moment, Elias understood. This man, whoever he was not here for him. He was here for her. Elias's breath caught in his throat as the stranger's outstretched hands hovered toward Luna, his movements slow, deliberate, like a man in a dream or under some unseen influence. The air between them crackled with a strange tension, and Luna, usually so composed, arched her back in a defensive posture, her fur bristling as though every fiber of her being was attuned to the danger that had suddenly manifested at their doorstep. For a moment, all Elias could do was watch, frozen in place, as the man's hollow eyes flicked from him to Luna, back to him again, as if trying to make sense of something that had been buried long ago. The sound that escaped the man's lips was a whisper, faint but unmistakable, carried on a breath that smelled faintly of salt and decay, like the ocean after a storm. It was a name, or perhaps it was more of a command. Elias didn't know. Luna. The man rasped. The cat's eyes flickered for a brief moment, a glimmer of recognition, or was it warning, before she turned sharply, her tail swishing once in a defiant arc, and without a second glance at the man, she darted past Elias and out into the hall. Elias blinked, his legs moving before his brain could catch up. "Luna," he called out, panic threading his voice. But Luna didn't stop. She had already vanished, her light, graceful form disappearing into the dark corners of the lighthouse. The stranger, for his part, made no move to follow her, though his body seemed to sway with some unseen force, as though the call of the sea was stronger than his will to stand still. Elias stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, not entirely sure what he should do. His heart was pounding, and his mind was clouded with the image of the stranger's empty eyes. Something was terribly wrong. This man wasn't just a shipwrecked sailor, wasn't just another lost soul washed ashore. There was something more to him, something ancient and haunting. The stranger's hands lowered slowly, and his gaze locked on Elias with an intensity that sent a cold shiver down his spine. "The light," the man said, his voice no more than a rasp, barely above a whisper. It calls to her." The words were not entirely coherent, fragmented, as if they were pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. "She belongs to them." Elias took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. Instead, he stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the stranger, who was now visibly trembling, his body convulsing in an odd rhythm. "Disu will take her. The deep will call her back." The man's voice dropped to a low mutter, almost as though speaking to himself now. "It's her fate, her legacy. It cannot be undone." Elias's mind raced, each word tumbling over the other in a rush of confusion. "What do you mean? Who are you?" But the man didn't answer. Instead, his eyes fluttered closed for a moment, and when they opened again, they were clouded, distant, like the eyes of someone who had been lost to the sea for far too long. Elias's heart lurched. He knew those eyes. They were the eyes of a sailor who had spent too many years on the water, staring into the endless abyss of the ocean, consumed by it, taken by it. "She must return to the deep, return to the current that calls to her," the man continued, his voice now carrying an eerie cadence, like a chant, a song that was older than the world itself. His hands twitched, and for a brief moment, Elias thought the man was going to lunge at him, but instead, the stranger seemed to collapse, his body falling to the ground with an unnatural heaviness. His breath rattled in his chest, each exhale a slow, painful gasp. It was clear now, the man was not well, his body weak and wasted, as if the ocean had taken far more from him than it had given. Elias, despite the overwhelming dread that gripped him, found his legs moving, taking him to the man's side, where he knelt down and tried to assess the situation. "You need help," Elias said, his voice tense, but the stranger's lips barely moved in response. His hand shot out suddenly, grasping Elias's wrist with a strength that seemed impossible for a man so frail. "Don't let her go," he whispered, his voice hoarse but filled with an urgent intensity. "She's not just a cat, not just a creature of flesh and fur. She's more than that." Elias stared at the man in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "She's just a cat." But the man shook his head vehemently, his eyes wide with terror. No, she is their vessel. The currents speak to her. The light guides her, and she belongs to the deep, whether she knows it or not. You've kept her too long. You've shielded her from the call, but the time is coming. The tides, they're rising again." The man's grip loosened, and his body seemed to go slack in Elias's hands, as if all the life had drained from him in an instant. Elias sat back, trying to catch his breath, his mind racing to make sense of the madness he had just witnessed. He wasn't sure if the man had died in his arms or if the strange, fevered words he had spoken were just the ramblings of a sailor gone mad. But one thing was clear, the man was not the only one who had felt the pull of the deep. There was something ancient at work here, something that had been waiting for Luna. And now, with the storm long past, with the waters calm again, the sea was calling her back. Elias rose to his feet slowly, his mind spinning with what he had learned. His eyes scanned the room, and then they landed on the small space where Luna had vanished. He didn't know what this meant, didn't know what he was supposed to do with this knowledge. But he knew one thing for sure. Luna was not just a cat. There was more to her, something far older, far deeper, than he had ever understood. The light that had guided him through the darkness, the storm, the years of solitude, was the same light that had drawn her here. And now, it was calling her back, calling her home. But to where? And what would happen when she answered? The questions loomed like dark clouds on the horizon, but Elias knew one thing for certain. No matter where the sea called her, he would follow. And if the deep was truly claiming her, he would do whatever it took to keep her from being lost forever. The world felt heavy as Elias stood at the window, watching the sun rise over the endless ocean, its light casting a golden hue across the surface of the water. The man's words echoed in his mind, a whisper that refused to fade. She's not just a cat. She belongs to the deep. Luna had always been more than a simple companion. Over the years, Elias had come to rely on her presence, her steady gaze and quiet wisdom that seemed to transcend the confines of ordinary life. But now, those gentle qualities were being painted in a new light. She was not just a friend, a creature of warmth and comfort. She was tied to something ancient, something far older than the lighthouse, perhaps even older than the land itself. Elias had never believed in old superstitions, never thought much of the stories the sailors whispered in taverns about creatures of the deep or spirits that walked the waves. But the man, whoever he had been, had shaken those beliefs to their core. There was a truth in his fevered words, something that Elias could no longer deny. Luna was not just a cat. She was something far more significant, and the deep, the sea that had taken so much from him, was now calling her back. With a heavy heart, Elias turned away from the window and walked down the spiral staircase to the main room of the lighthouse. The fire in the hearth was little more than embers now, the warmth of the flames long faded into the chill morning air. He reached the small table where Luna often slept, but she wasn't there. She was nowhere to be found. A sense of urgency swept over him, and for a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm him. Where is she? His eyes swept over the lighthouse, over the beams of the structure, the narrow corridors, and the spiral staircases that led to the tower, but Luna was not there. He called her name softly, but the silence that followed only deepened his anxiety. For years, Luna had always been close by, never straying too far. But now, in this moment, her absence felt like the quiet before a storm. As he moved through the lighthouse, his thoughts became tangled with the warning the stranger had given him. The deep will call her back. Could it be true? Could Luna have some connection to the sea, something that was pulling her away from him? Elias stopped at the door to the tower, feeling an odd pull in his chest. The lighthouse tower was the highest point of the entire island, and it was the most sacred space for him, where he maintained the great beacon that had guided ships safely for years. But today, it felt different. The door to the tower was ajar, a strange wind tugging at the edges of it, as if beckoning him inside. He stepped forward, the creak of the door echoing in the stillness. Inside, the tower was dark, save for the thin streams of light that crept in through the narrow windows, casting long shadows across the walls. At the center of the room, there was a soft sound, a gentle rustling, like fabric in the wind. It came from the far corner, where a small alcove was tucked away, hidden from view unless you were standing at the right angle. Elias's heart skipped a beat when he saw her. Luna was sitting in the alcove, her back to him, staring out through the window, her tail flicking back and forth in the still air. But she wasn't just watching the sea. She was listening. Her ears twitched, as if attuned to a sound he couldn't hear. The deep, rhythmic pulse of the ocean seemed to be emanating from somewhere beyond the window, as if it were calling her, speaking to her in a language that only she could understand. Elias took a step forward, but Luna didn't turn. Instead, she remained motionless, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her body tense, coiled like a spring. "Luna," Elias whispered softly, hesitant to break the fragile silence that hung between them. Her name felt too small in that moment, too simple. The cat turned her head slightly, her amber eyes glinting in the pale light, but she made no move to acknowledge him. Her gaze seemed distant, as if she were looking at something far beyond the shores of the lighthouse, something that he couldn't see. A knot tightened in Elias's chest. He had always believed that the lighthouse was a place of safety, a place where the land and the sea could coexist in harmony. But now, standing there with Luna at the window, he realized how fragile that harmony had always been. The ocean was not just a physical boundary between the land and the unknown. It was a force that could shape lives, could pull them in directions they never imagined. And the sea, it seemed, was calling for Luna. "Luna," Elias said again, his voice wavering with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "Don't go." But Luna didn't respond. Her eyes seemed to shimmer with an ancient knowledge, a wisdom that Elias could never hope to understand. It was as if she had already made up her mind, as if she had always known what was coming and had been preparing for it in her own silent way. The wind began to pick up again, a soft gust that rattled the windows, and for a fleeting moment, Elias thought he saw something, an image, a figure, at the edge of his vision. He blinked, but it was gone. Just the wind, just the pull of the sea. But his mind kept returning to the words of the stranger. The deep will call her back. Was that what was happening now? Was Luna being drawn back to the ocean? He reached out, his hand trembling as he tried to touch her, to bring her back to him. But as his fingers hovered just above her fur, Luna shifted, her body moving with a fluid grace that left no trace of hesitation. She rose to her feet, and for the first time in a long while, Elias saw something in her eyes, something that was neither sadness nor fear, but a quiet acceptance, as if she knew her fate, as if she had always known she had to return to the sea. Slowly, deliberately, Luna padded to the door, her tail flicking behind her. Elias's chest tightened with a mixture of dread and love. "Please," he whispered, but the word was carried away by the wind, swallowed up by the vast emptiness between them. Luna paused at the threshold, her back to him. She didn't look back, but Elias could see her ears twitch, her body poised, listening to the rhythm of the waves, to the call that was growing louder with each passing second. And then, without another glance, she stepped through the doorway and disappeared into the night. Elias stood there, motionless, his heart aching as he watched her go. The silence in the lighthouse was deafening now, the absence of her presence overwhelming. The world outside had changed. The sea had taken her, just as the stranger had warned. And Elias was left alone with nothing but the fading echoes of her purring and the soft pull of the ocean, calling to him. Elias stood frozen in the doorway of the lighthouse tower, his heart heavy with the weight of the moment. Luna had slipped away, silently, as though she had never been more than a shadow, a whisper of something greater. She had walked out of his life as easily as she had entered it, leaving him in a silence so profound that it felt as though the very air had been drained from the lighthouse. The world outside seemed to stretch out before him, endless, vast, and unforgiving. The ocean, once a distant companion, now felt like a chasm, something that held secrets beneath its surface, secrets that had been kept for far too long. Luna had known those secrets, and now she had gone to claim them. He could hear the faint call of the waves, a distant murmur on the wind. It was as if the sea itself were speaking to him, drawing him into its depths, urging him to follow. But Elias remained still, as though his feet were rooted to the ground. He didn't know what to do, didn't know how to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions and revelations that had come crashing down on him. The man, the stranger, had spoken of fate, of Luna's fate, of the deep, of the ancient forces that had been at work long before Elias had ever set foot on this island. He had always thought of the lighthouse as his home, his sanctuary. But now it felt like a prison. He was trapped, alone, with nothing but the echoes of Luna's absence and the endless stretch of the sea that had claimed her. For a long moment, Elias did nothing. He stood at the threshold, staring out at the horizon where the sky met the water, unable to tear his gaze away. He had always known that the lighthouse was a place of transitions, of guiding ships safely through stormy waters. But it had never felt like this. Now, it felt as though the lighthouse was the boundary between two worlds, the land where he had lived, and the ocean that was pulling Luna back into its depths. The silence in the tower was broken by the soft sound of footsteps behind him. Elias turned, his heart skipping a beat, and there, standing in the doorway, was Thomas. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide with worry as he looked past Elias to the empty space where Luna had been just moments before. "Where's Luna?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling. "I heard her. I thought I heard her in the tower. I couldn't find her anywhere." Elias swallowed hard, his throat tight. He had meant to keep it from Thomas, had meant to protect him from the strange forces that were at work here, forces that neither of them could understand. But it was too late. The moment Luna had left, Elias had lost the last shred of control over the situation. The truth had come crashing down, and there was no hiding it now. "She's gone," Elias said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Gone," Thomas repeated, his face crumpling with confusion and hurt. But she's always here. She never leaves. She's always with you." Elias shook his head, a hollow ache in his chest. "Not anymore." He called to her. She had to go. Thomas didn't seem to understand, his brow furrowed with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. But Elias couldn't explain it any more clearly. He barely understood it himself. All he knew was that Luna was no longer his. She had never truly belonged to him. She belonged to something much larger, something that had been waiting for her to return. And now, she had answered the call. Elias turned away from Thomas, his eyes once again fixed on the ocean. "She was never just a cat," he said quietly, more to himself than to Thomas. "She was something more. The light. They were always meant for her." Thomas remained silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning the distant horizon as if searching for some sign of Luna's return. But the sea was still, its surface calm and unbroken, offering no answers. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice small but firm. "But why? Why her?" Elias closed his eyes, leaning against the stone walls of the tower. He didn't have the answers. All he had were the fragments of the stranger's cryptic words, the warnings of a fate neither he nor Luna could escape. "I don't know," he said softly, "but I do know this. She wasn't meant to stay here with me. She was always meant to return to the sea, to whatever it is that calls her." Thomas's face was filled with sadness, but also a quiet understanding. He had spent enough time with Elias and Luna to know that there were things in this world that couldn't be explained with logic or reason. The sea, with all its mysteries, was one of those things. The boy took a step forward, his hand gently resting on Elias's shoulder. "Then we'll find her," Thomas said quietly. "We'll bring her back. We can't let her just disappear." Elias looked at him, the boy's words stirring something deep within him. He had spent so many years protecting the lighthouse, keeping it running, keeping the light alive. But the truth was that the light had never been for him alone. It had been a beacon for the lost, for those who needed to find their way. Luna had always been a part of that light, even if he hadn't understood it at first. Perhaps it was time for him to follow that light, to seek out the answers he had been avoiding for so long. Maybe the light could guide them to Luna, back to the sea, back to whatever it was that had called her home. "We can't bring her back," Elias said slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of his own realization. "But we can go to her. We can find out what this all means. What it all is." The words felt strange on his tongue, as though they didn't fully belong to him. But there was a sense of purpose in them, something that had been missing for far too long. And for the first time in days, Elias felt a flicker of hope. The deep had called to Luna. And now it was calling to him too. The time for waiting was over. Elias turned to Thomas, his eyes steady. "We're going to find her. We're going to find out what this deep is, what it wants. And maybe, just maybe, we'll bring her back. But we can't do it alone." Thomas nodded, determination settling on his young face. He had always believed in the mysteries of the sea, the legends and whispers that surrounded the island. Now, he would be part of the journey, part of uncovering the secrets that had drawn Luna away. Together, they would walk into the unknown. And maybe, just maybe, they would find the answers that had been hidden in the depths for so long. Elias took a deep breath and turned back to the window. The sea stretched before them, an endless, shimmering expanse. And out there, somewhere beyond the horizon, Luna waited, waiting for him to answer the call of the deep. The journey had begun. It had been hours since Elias and Thomas had left the lighthouse, walking in silence as the ocean winds whipped around them, biting at their skin. The path that led down to the shore was familiar, carved into the jagged cliffs over the years, worn smooth by the countless footsteps of the lighthouse keepers and their families. But today, the path seemed different. The sea seemed to call louder, more urgently, as though it recognized their presence and was beckoning them closer, to the edge, to the unknown depths where Luna had gone. Thomas walked beside Elias, his small, determined form a reminder that despite the vastness of the ocean and the uncertainty of their quest, he was not alone. They were in this together. The boy had insisted on accompanying Elias, and though Elias had tried to discourage him, the boy's resolve had been unshakable. He had grown up with the legends of the sea, had heard the stories of the mysterious creatures and the lost sailors, and something in him had always known that Luna wasn't just an ordinary cat. The walk was slow, the path growing steeper as they neared the rocks that jutted out into the sea. The lighthouse tower, standing tall behind them, felt miles away. And yet, the pull of the ocean, the same pull that had claimed Luna, seemed to grow stronger with each step. When they reached the edge of the cliffs, Elias paused, his eyes scanning the dark waters below. The sea was calm now, deceptively so, but there was a tension in the air, a quiet before the storm. The horizon stretched out before them, a blank canvas of endless blue. "Do you think we'll find her?" Thomas's voice broke the stillness, his words filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Elias didn't immediately respond. He didn't know if they would find her, if they would find anything at all, but something in him told him that this was not just about bringing Luna back. This was about understanding something much larger, something that had always been there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. "I don't know," Elias said at last, his voice hoarse. "But I have to try." Thomas nodded solemnly. "We'll try together." With those words, Elias felt a flicker of something deep inside, a spark of determination. The boy was right. They were in this together, no matter how dark the waters might be, no matter how unknown the path ahead. They continued down the cliffs, following the rocky shoreline until they reached a small cove hidden from the open sea. The cove was sheltered, its waters still and dark, the only movement coming from the occasional ripple of a fish or the soft lapping of waves against the stones. But there was something strange about it. Elias could feel it in the air, in the way the sea seemed to hum with energy, as though it were alive in a way that defied reason. Thomas crouched down at the water's edge, dipping his fingers into the cool water. "It feels different," he said, his voice soft, as if afraid to disturb the delicate balance of the moment. "Like something's watching us." Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the water. There was something about the place that felt familiar, but at the same time, it felt like they had crossed into another world. One that was just as much a part of them as the air they breathed, yet completely alien. "This is where Luna went," Elias said, more to himself than to Thomas. "I feel it. This is where the sea called her." Thomas looked up at Elias, his brow furrowed. "But how do we find her? How do we even know where to look?" Elias took a deep breath, stepping closer to the water, feeling the cool breeze tugging at his coat. He didn't know. He didn't have all the answers, but the call of the sea, of Luna, was growing stronger, undeniable. It was as though the sea itself were reaching out to him, guiding him, showing him the way. He could almost hear it now, a deep, rhythmic pulse in the air. "I think we need to go deeper," Elias said, his voice quiet but resolute. "We need to follow the currents, follow the pull. The sea will guide us, just as it guided her." He looked out over the water, watching the ripples dance across the surface. And then, in the distance, he saw it, a glimmer of light, faint but unmistakable, shining through the depths. It wasn't the lighthouse beacon, it was something else. Something ancient, something that had always been there, beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. "That light," Elias whispered. "It's her. It's Luna." Thomas followed Elias's gaze, his eyes wide with wonder. "How do you know?" Elias's heart raced. "I don't know. But it's her. I can feel it." Without another word, Elias began to strip off his coat, preparing to wade into the water. The chill of the sea nipped at his skin, but he barely noticed. He had to get to the light. He had to find Luna. "Elias!" Thomas called, his voice full of alarm. "Are you sure this is a good idea? What if it's dangerous?" Elias turned to the boy, his face set in determination. "We have no choice. We have to go." With that, he plunged into the water, feeling the cold embrace him, the salt stinging his skin as he swam toward the light. The current was strong, But Elias fought against it, his arms cutting through the water as he pushed forward. He didn't know what awaited him beneath the surface, but he couldn't stop. Luna was out there. The sea was calling, and he had to answer. As he swam deeper, the world around him seemed to grow darker, the light from above fading, swallowed by the depths. But the glow ahead grew brighter, stronger, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. It was there, just within reach. He could feel it, feel Luna's presence guiding him, pulling him closer. Suddenly, the water around him began to shift, swirling as if it had a life of its own. Elias fought to keep his head above the surface, but the current was becoming too powerful. He was being pulled deeper, faster, the water closing in around him. Panic surged in his chest as he realized that he was no longer swimming against the current. He was being carried by it. And then, just as he thought he might be lost to the depths, he felt a presence beside him, something familiar, something comforting. He looked to his side and saw her, Luna, her fur glistening with an otherworldly glow, her eyes locked onto his, calm and steady as ever. She was there, in the depths, waiting for him. The sea had not claimed her, it had merely brought her to this place, to this moment. And now, she was ready to lead him to the answers they both sought. Elias reached out, his hand trembling as he touched Luna's sleek fur. "Luna," he whispered, his voice filled with awe and relief. "You're here." Luna mewed softly, her body moving closer to his, her gaze steady and knowing. Together, they were about to uncover the secrets of the deep, the secrets that had always been hers to keep. The depths of the sea were darker than Elias had ever imagined, a place where even the light of the stars above seemed distant, like a faint memory. The water around him felt alive, its currents swirling and pulsing with a rhythm that was foreign, yet somehow familiar. But Luna was with him now. Her glow illuminated the dark waters, casting a soft light that made the shadows of the sea dance. She had always been a creature of the light, a guide in the night, and now Elias understood that the light wasn't just a beacon, it was her essence, her purpose. Luna swam gracefully through the water, her sleek body cutting through the currents with ease. She looked back at Elias, her eyes gleaming with an ancient wisdom that he could never fully comprehend, but he could feel it, like a thread binding them together. With every movement, Luna seemed to draw Elias deeper into the heart of the sea, into a place where time felt distorted, where the boundaries between the world of men and the world of the deep were blurred. The pull of the ocean grew stronger as they descended further. Elias's chest tightened, but it wasn't fear that filled him, it was awe. There was something majestic about this place, something primal. The sea had always been a force of nature, wild and untamed, but now, standing in its depths, Elias felt like he was standing at the very heart of its being, a place where mysteries and truths existed that no man had ever known. Soon, they reached a vast, submerged cavern. The walls of the cavern shimmered with bioluminescent algae, casting an ethereal glow across the dark waters. It was a place of quiet power, ancient and sacred. At the center of the cavern, a massive stone structure stood, half buried in the sand. Elias swam closer, drawn to it by some unseen force. He could feel the energy radiating from the stone, pulsing in time with his own heartbeat. Luna floated beside him, her eyes locked on the structure. Elias followed her gaze and saw something within the stone, a symbol, ancient and worn by time. The symbol was familiar, but Elias couldn't quite place it. It was the same symbol that had appeared in his dreams, the one that had haunted him in the lonely hours of the night. It was the key, the answer to everything. Luna mewed softly, her voice resonating in the depths of the cavern. Elias reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold surface of the stone. The moment his hand made contact, the symbol began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter, until it illuminated the entire cavern. The water around them seemed to vibrate with energy, the currents shifting as if the very sea was alive with power. A voice, ancient and wise, echoed in Elias's mind, not with words, but with understanding. "You are here because you have been chosen. The bond between you and the deep is not accidental. Luna is not just a cat, nor a mere creature of the land. She is a guardian, a protector of the ancient forces that lie within the sea." Elias's heart raced as he absorbed the truth of the message. The sea had never been a place of chaos. It was a keeper of secrets, a sanctuary of ancient powers. Luna was one of the guardians of this power, a protector of the balance between the land and the ocean. And Elias, he realized, was bound to this world in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. The lighthouse, the sea, and Luna, they were all connected by something older than time itself. The voice spoke again, this time clearer, more direct. You, Elias, have kept the light for many years, but the time has come for you to become part of the deep. You must take your place alongside Luna, and together, you will protect the balance that keeps the world in harmony. The sea will not be controlled, nor will the land. But if you honor your bond with the deep, you will understand the rhythm of both, and your lighthouse will guide the way. Elias felt a profound sense of peace wash over him as the voice faded into the depths. The waters around him grew still, and the glow of the stone structure dimmed, leaving only the soft light of Luna's presence. She swam toward him, her eyes reflecting the same wisdom that had guided her for so long. It was clear now, she had always known her purpose. And so had he. As Elias looked around the cavern, at the ancient stone and the glowing waters, he understood that his journey was not to take Luna back to the land, but to join her in this new existence. The lighthouse was a symbol, a beacon for those who needed guidance. But now, Elias's role had changed. He was no longer just the keeper of the light. He was part of something far greater, a bridge between two worlds. Luna nuzzled him gently, her purring vibrating through the water. Elias smiled, his heart full of love and gratitude. He had never felt more at peace than he did in this moment, in this place, where the sea and the land met. And as the bond between them deepened, he realized that this was where he was always meant to be. The deep had called to him, and he had answered. Together, Elias and Luna would protect the balance of the world. The lighthouse would stand, not as a solitary beacon of light, but as a symbol of the harmony between the land and the sea. The waves would continue to crash against the shore, the winds would howl through the cliffs, but Elias no longer feared the ocean. He understood it now. He was part of it just as Luna had always been. And with that understanding, the deep was no longer a mystery to him. It was home.